Good morning. March 1st. Woohoo! I wish I could say I think the winter is done, but it's not. It's supposed to snow again next week, isn't it? Yeah. And yesterday was so gorgeous. And today's a gorgeous day, but you know, we have to put a jacket back on. Really? I thought it was only supposed to be in the 40s today.
WWW said 40s.
Yeah, that's what I watched too. So I'm giving everybody a minute to come in and find chairs and for people to get logged on. So my husband got me some shirts some quilting themed shirts for Valentine's Day. He never does that. But I like this one. I thought it was very appropriate for me and for being here. So, and they actually fit. That's a miracle in itself that he was able to find something that fit. He probably did, but I've kind of changed some sizes recently, so he was kind of out on a limb by himself. So he did pretty good. This is the block we're doing this month. It's called Enclosed Square. And it's kind of a version of square and a square and a square kind of thing. So we'll go through the steps, how to make it. I do have a couple of things I want to touch on first. Our bolt of orange batik that we are using right now, that's your center and your corners. There were some small holes in it at the beginning of the bolt, and we thought that was all of it, but we're finding that people have been getting kits that have these teeny little holes in it. So if you are unfortunately one of those that gets that, be sure and tell Amy, she'll get you another piece. So anyhow, it's not something you ever expect to have happen, but we have had it happen. Also, as we go from bolt to bolt, there are some, which this is totally typical for batiks, there are some inconsistencies in colors. And of course, depending on what piece you get, there's lots of different colors within all of our colors. So sometimes you get a piece that's more green and more brown and more, you know, whatever. So I just want you to be aware that if your piece looks a little different or quite a bit different, we always check the SKUs. We always check to make sure we are using the right color and that we receive the right color. So just telling you that it's still, no matter what, with batiks, that happens. Okay, so one thing about cutting, again, we have some pieces that are very close in size from width to length. So make sure you have your pieces oriented. And, you know, if you need to do the math and say, oh, this piece I need 10.5 inches, well, make sure you have that direction go in the right direction, okay? Okay, let's get into the square, the block. We're going to start with a square in a square unit. It is the same snowballing or flippy corner or angled corner technique. There's so many terms for the same thing that, but it's a technique that we've been doing throughout already. It's just that we happen to be enclosing the whole middle square. So you start with a 4.5 inch orange square, and you're going to use 2.5 inch very light squares and draw a diagonal line. Now, when you do this technique, you need to do 2 opposite corners because your pieces are going to overlap when you put the second set of 2 on. So you can't really go 1, 2, 3. I mean, well, you could, but it's pretty cumbersome. So I usually do 2 opposite sides, press them back towards the light and trim off behind it, and then do the other 2 corners and do the same thing. Now, again, this is one of those times where the picture doesn't really show that there's an overlap. but that's what's making your 1/4 inch seam allowance then for your next pieces to go on, so you don't lose your points and have flat points. Okay, this square should still measure 4.5 inches when you're done. Now, I'm going to talk to you about squaring that up. You shouldn't have to, but I want you to know how to do that for this type of unit, because as you add pieces on, you want to check your size as you go. And if you have anything that's stretched or gotten wonky, you can trim it off as you go. So this piece is 4.5 inches, we said. So you need to find your center of that, which in this case is 2 1/4. And so you would usually when you square up, you're looking at your 45-degree line, but you don't care about your 45-degree line because there isn't that kind of a seam, okay? So 2 1/4 inches should be where your points are on all 4 sides, okay? That's the goal. Okay, so 2 1/4, 2 1/4, 2 1/4. You can see that. Okay, make sure that you have 4.5 inches like you would if you were squaring up a half square triangle. But make sure you have a 1/4 inch between the edge of your ruler and your 1/4 inch line on your ruler. And make sure that that ends up at 2 1/4 inches. Then trim off anything that might be outside that. Okay, then turn it around and do the same thing. Now you'll do this same technique like at this point when we get this around and it's bigger. As long as your ruler is big enough to do that, you're still going to find the halfway point and you're still going to trim off anything that's outside that. Okay? All right. So we have our center that's 4.5 inches. Okay. For step 2, we're going to take our 3 5/8 inch light green and we're going to cut them once on the diagonal. And you're going to end up with 4 triangles. Your long edge, which is your bias edge, is going to be sewn onto the sides of your center, okay? So to do that, fold your long side in half and find your center. Just finger press it or put a pin there, okay? Then lay that right sides together on your center point, okay? And you'll have little tips that are hanging off the corners, and that is correct. You want that, okay? When you stitch, you should end up about, your 1/4 inch seam allowance should end up about where the edge of that square, of that triangle, and your edge of your square match. Should be close. If it's a little bit more than that, don't worry about it. But okay, then you're going to press it back towards the green. Now, you have these little tips hanging off the edge that, you know, I just talked about. And if you have a 2 1/2 inch foot that has a flange on it, you know, an edge, sometimes those little tips want to get caught up in that. So, and mine is that way. So I like to trim those off. But some people that don't have a flange on their foot like to keep those little tips to have something to hang on to get it started. So trim or not, it's your choice. But eventually I would trim those off just to reduce the bulk inside your block. Okay. So you will again do opposite sides and then opposite sides again. When you're done, it should end up at 6 inches. So check your measurement before you go on. Okay. All right, then we're going to start constructing these guys that will ultimately end up being your next round. Okay. So that is step 4. And we start with our blue rectangle, light blue 3-inch squares, and you'll cut them one time on the diagonal. So you have 4 triangles. Sorry, my nose is trying to run. Okay, then you're going to enclose it with the black. And so you start with a 1.5 by 3 7/8 inch rectangle, and you match up your corners. Okay, so you're gonna sew it. It says sew it on the right side. So that's how it's oriented in the picture. So you'll put that on and match this top corner. And as you can see, it's intended to go way past the edge of your triangle. Okay, that's what you want. Okay, then you're going to press it towards the black. Then you take your 1.5 by 4 7/8 and you'll match this point again. And sew that seam and press it back. And you have a unit that looks like this that is that has the points that stick way out. Okay, in the instructions on step 5, it says each side of the new triangle should measure 4 7/8. So what I did was I took my ruler before I cut it. This last unit we put on is 4 7/8 inches long. So you should at least have that. And by the time you added another inch to this one, you have 4 7/8 inch also. But I took my ruler and put it in the corner and measured down 4 7/8 and made sure I had that much. Because if you don't, you might have to make your seam allowance smaller to get your size right. Okay. So then I just went ahead and drew a line just to make sure that that I knew where I was supposed to cut. Now on mine, I'll show you the line on camera. On mine, you can see it's just a tiny bit into the blue. Some of my corners were that way, and that's what I trimmed off. So you can see in this case, I did actually cut away a little of the blue. Not all of my corners were like that. So, maybe I didn't cut exactly on the diagonal or whatever. But anyhow, I just want you to see what you may encounter. Okay, you'll make 4 of those, and then you will sew those on as your next ring around that. And that one, then you'll measure 8.5 inches square when you're done. Okay, any questions on this part so far? Okay, all right, then in step 7, we're going to make our half square triangles out of the light and the orange. You trim them up to 2.5 inches like usual. They're going to ultimately become the corners of your block. All right, then in step 8, we're using our light blue 2.5 inch squares, and we are making these guys that will ultimately become the outside edges of the block. Okay, so again, it's the same exact technique as we did here. And any other time we've done our angled corners. So draw your line and make sure you do 4 that are the same angle this way, and make sure you do 4 that are the opposite angle. And make sure you check them and press them before you cut them off. Okay? How do I know? Did them wrong. So, okay, so doesn't matter which set, 4 of them you will press towards the blue, 4 of them you will press backwards towards the light. Okay? That's what's going to give you a sharp, that will make those seams nest when you sew them together, and that's what's going to give you a good sharp point, and will also give you your 1/4 inch seam allowance left on the outside. Okay, when you are done doing that, you will sew them together in the middle, and have 4 sets that look like this. It says press towards the left. Who's left? Up, down? I don't know. Press them either way. Doesn't matter. It's going to actually, this seam actually comes into where these diagonals come together. So it's not really a nesting situation because you have an angle coming into a straight. So, and this step here, she doesn't really say which to press. So whichever way makes it look the best. And on this seam here. So again, these aren't really gonna, so yeah, doesn't matter. Okay, when you get those 4 made, you're gonna sew 2 of them to 2 of your sides. And then you'll sew your half square triangles to the remaining 2. Again, make sure your orange is on the outside corners, and then those will be your other 2 sides. Clear? Yay! Okay, any questions at all? All right, Amy's